Let me ask you a question. Do you think English adjective rules are easy? Well, some are, but some rules are hard. Do you know all of the hard rules? By the end of this lesson, you will know all of the advanced English grammar rules for adjectives. I cover 50 rules, and if you know and use these rules, your English writing and English speaking will improve. First of all, adjectives with no noun. Now, that sounds strange because we are used to adjectives describing nouns, such as here. Young people like to play. Young is the adjective that describes the noun people. But when you use the, something can change. Sometimes the followed by the adjective means no noun is required. For example, the young like to play. The young forms the subject and like is the verb. So the young becomes the noun. But young is the adjective. So what's happening here? In this situation, the followed by adjective means all of the adjective. So when we say the young, we mean all of the young. There are also different rules when it comes to countries with adjectives. Now, usually country adjectives can often become nouns after the by adding an S. For instance, Mexican is an adjective describing the people of Mexico. This can become a noun by saying the Mexicans. That means all people in Mexico. Or Indian can become the Indians. But with some countries, it's different. Countries ending with a sh, ch, or es do not need this extra S. For example, the British, the French, the Japanese. And there are other instances where we have this pattern, the followed by the adjective, where there should have been a noun, but the noun can be omitted, such as in this case. When it is obvious which noun is being described by an adjective, we can leave the noun out completely. Compare these two. She's the cleverest pupil in the class. Here we have the, followed by the adjective cleverest, and then the noun pupil. But we normally expect a class to be full of pupils. So if we take the word pupil out, it still makes sense. She's the cleverest in the class. We still know exactly what we mean here because the context of pupils is obvious. But make sure that this context is obvious. Perhaps the noun may have been in a question beforehand, or maybe you used the noun in what you said just before. Make sure it's obvious, then you can follow this little trick. Now we're going to look at instances where the adjective can come before the article. Let's use this example of a car. What do you think of this car? Does it look fast to you? If you do think so, you'd probably describe it like this: a fast car. And this is a typical pattern for a noun phrase with an adjective. We have the article, if we need one, a, then the adjective fast, and then the noun car. That's normal. But in certain situations, we can change this, such as with the word as. I don't have as fast a car as yours. So with as, we can now turn around the order and have the adjective fast before the article a. And there's some other words that work in the same way. How? I never knew how fast a car she had. Or so. It was so fast a car. Now this one's a bit more unusual. We're more likely to say it was such a fast car rather than use so. But it can be used and it is grammatically correct. Similarly with too. It was too fast a car. The speed was very, very high. Too fast. Too fast brings fast before the article a. But we'd usually say the car was too fast. Also, we can use that. It was that fast a car. You'd probably use it after a sentence that works with this. Perhaps the car was the fastest ever made. It was that fast a car. And that refers backwards to what we've already said. But it's another instance where the adjective can come before the article. Are you finding this useful? If you are, you might find some of my online courses useful too. Click on the links in the description to find out more. Now, when you use an adjective before a noun, you would think there's no possibility that it could end a sentence. But there are many situations where adjectives do end sentences. First of all, have you ever noticed in English poetry or English songs that adjectives sometimes are placed at the end in order to make the poem's lines rhyme or the song lyrics rhyme? That means the final sound is the same in one line as one before. And people will use what's called artistic impression or artistic license to do this. So instead of saying, I saw the blue sky, if it's more convenient to get the poem or the song to rhyme, you might say, I saw the sky blue. We don't do this in normal writing or speaking, but when it comes to poetic English, it's possible to do that. Another example is when we have which followed by to be, then the adjective afterwards. In these cases, sometimes we can omit which and to be, leaving the adjective on its own without anything else. So instead of saying it's the only answer which is believable, we could say it's the only answer believable. Now, in both of these situations, the adjective comes at the end of the sentence. But in the second one, we have this interesting situation where we have a noun that's immediately followed by the adjective, and what's happened is we've left out which or that, and then the verb to be. This is similar to who followed by to be. I saw some children who were awake, but we could leave out who were. I saw some children awake. It's not particularly common. It's something you're likely to say if you're speaking in passing or quickly or informally, but it does happen and you can use it. There are certain words where you can place an adjective afterwards to finish a sentence, such as something. Your friends have bought you something special. Also, everything. Don't worry, I'm going to make everything better. Look at this lady painting a beautiful view. And you might say this, she has an amazing talent. She can make anything beautiful. After somebody or someone. I'm looking for someone tall. Look at this tall man. The person is thinking about it and describing to the other person. I'm looking for someone tall. And also with measurements, we can often put the adjective after the quantity. How tall are they? Oh, I think they are about 2 meters tall. 2 meters is the quantity, and then the adjective that refers to 2 meters comes afterwards. Here's an interesting use of an adjective at the end of the sentence that you may not have come across. Look at the example. Here's a lady. What's she doing to the floor? You could say, or she could say, I'm wiping the floor clean. Now, where's the adjective? The adjective is clean. It comes after the word floor. But why? When we have verb, object and adjective, and the object becomes the adjective, we can use this pattern. I'm wiping the floor clean, or literally, what happens to the floor? It becomes clean. So because it becomes clean, we can put clean after the noun floor, because the floor becomes the adjective. And another interesting peculiarity in English is that there are many adjectives that start with a, which can come at the end of a sentence, such as, look at the example here, you've got a bear running after a boy. The boy says, I'm running away, I'm really afraid. But the word afraid changes if you want to put it at the start of the sentence. You wouldn't normally say the afraid boy ran away. Afraid is normally reserved for the end position. If you want to use it at the beginning, you need to say frightened instead. And probably the most common reason that you'll have an adjective ending a sentence is when you have a subject followed by a copular verb. This is where you have an adjective that's sometimes called a subject complement. The adjective actually describes the subject. As you can see in the two pictures here, she is peaceful. Peaceful is the adjective. Is a copular verb, and that tells us that peaceful is describing she. She is not doing the activity. She is being described by peaceful. Or he seems tired. Seems is a copular verb. Tired describes the subject. When adjectives are intensifiers, we have to be careful about where we put them. Look at the two examples. It is an absolute mess. Have you ever been somewhere where you feel it's an absolute mess? You go into someone's house and everything's in the wrong place. It is an absolute mess. Here, absolute is an intensifying adjective for mess. It makes the mess seem greater. But when you try to switch the order around and put absolute at the end of the sentence, it doesn't work. You can't do it. The intensifying adjectives need to go before their noun, but not after. So you'd say it is an absolute mess, but not the mess is absolute. One of the hardest things to learn and remember about adjectives is the order that you use if there is more than one adjective. When there are multiple adjectives, follow this order. Now, it's not a perfect order. Sometimes people break the order, but this is the general order to use if you have more than one adjective. You have to consider what type of adjective each one is to decide on the order. So starting with a noun such as the word rod, a rod is something to catch fish with. The first adjective that you would use nearest to the word rod would be its purpose. So you could say a fishing rod. But if you want to add the material, that needs to come before fishing and rod. So you would say a wooden fishing rod in that order. And if you talk about the origin, let's say it's English, that comes before any of those two. What type of rod is it? It's an English wooden fishing rod. Then the colour. It's a red English wooden fishing rod. Then shape. Well, I've said rectangular here. I couldn't think of a shape for the fishing rod, but if you did have a shape, it would come here. So let's just imagine it's nice and straight and long. Let's call it a rectangular red English wooden fishing rod. Obviously, you wouldn't use all of these adjectives at the same time. Normally, you might use 2 adjectives, maybe 3. I think if you're using 5 adjectives, that's probably too many. But if you want to use them, they need to come in this particular order. Here's the next type, age. A new rectangular red English wooden fishing rod. Physical quality. A thin, new rectangular red English wooden fishing rod. Then size, short, for example. And then opinion. The opinion comes first. What type of rod is it? It's an amazing, short, thin, new rectangular red English wooden fishing rod. But of course, we wouldn't usually use all of them at the same time. We would probably pick 2 or 3. So we might say it's an amazing new fishing rod. How do we choose the order? Well, we go through this list and we start off with amazing, then new, then fishing, because it's opinion, then age, then purpose. Or a short wooden fishing rod. Here we have the size first, then the material, then the purpose. A short wooden fishing rod. Now, some adjectives end with ed and some adjectives finish with ing, but the root is the same. For instance here, what should this boy say? What best represents the picture you can see? I am bored or I am boring? Which one is it? Well, if you say I am bored, it means something else makes you feel bored. But if you say I am boring, it means you cause someone else to feel bored. So you've got to be careful which one you use, whether you use the ed or the ing, because if you use the wrong one, you may accuse the wrong person of being that adjective. If you say I am boring, you're basically criticising yourself. The correct answer here for the picture is I am bored. The boy looks bored, perhaps by the book he's reading. Something else to be careful with ed adjectives is their pronunciation. Now, usually adjectives ending ed do not have a vowel sound in the ed. So it's not amused, it's amused. It's not cooked, it's cooked. But when you have a T or a D before the ed, then we do need that vowel sound. Otherwise, we have a problem going from the T to the D or the D to the D. So it's not wanted, it's wanted. It's not decided, it's decided. And there are a number of other exceptions too. Naked, learned when it's an adjective, learned where we don't pronounce the E would be for the verb form, for the past of the verb. But learned is an adjective that means someone who knows a lot. We also have ragged, sacred, crooked, beloved, wicked, and there are a few others too. So be careful and make sure you know when to pronounce the ed in full or when to just pronounce the D. Most rules for comparatives are fairly basic, but it does get a bit more complicated as you go along. So the most basic rules are that if you have a one-syllable word, adjective, then to make it a comparative, add er. So fair becomes fairer, green becomes greener, and dark becomes darker. For example, make it darker. And that really means more than now. Increase the level of dark. Make it darker. Or if you're comparing two things, you can use than. Nighttime is darker than the daytime. So than enables us to say that one thing has a greater quality of something than another. So nighttime has a greater quality of dark than the daytime. If there's two syllables or more, then usually we use more followed by the adjective, and the adjective doesn't change. So more beautiful, more historical, beautiful. Three syllables. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Historical. 4 syllables. 1, 2, 3, 4. If a word finishes with a Y, that becomes IER, such as happier. And an E simply becomes ER. We don't add another E on, such as nicer. But there are a few irregular forms to learn. Little becomes less, good becomes better, bad becomes worse, much becomes more, and far becomes further. Or possibly farther. Superlatives follow a similar pattern. With one syllable, add est. With 2 or more syllables, add most followed by the adjective. Y becomes iest, E becomes est, and the irregular forms little becomes least, good best, bad becomes worst, much becomes most, far becomes furthest or farthest. But how about if you want to say there is an equal comparison or even a negative comparative? Using as and as can help us here. If there's an equal amount of something, you can say as followed by adjective followed by as. Look at these two people juggling. They look exactly the same. So to compare them, you can say, I am as good as you at juggling. As good as you means we're equal in terms of being good at juggling. This person has dropped the ball though, so they're not in the same level. So we can say, I'm not as good as you at juggling. Not as good as you makes it a negative comparative. Now there's one more way to do it, and that's using not followed by the actual comparative adjective. When you do that though, it doesn't mean the negative comparative. It could be the same as an as or not an as. It can be equal or negative. It simply means not more. So if you say, I am not better than you at juggling, it means my ability is either equal to yours or worse than yours. It's just not better. That's all. So the example you can see here in yellow can reflect either the equal or the negative status that you can see in white on the left. Sometimes there can be some confusion between adverbs and adjectives. Now, adverbs often add ly to an adjective in order to become an adverb. So nice can become nicely. We take the adjective nice and we turn it into an adverb by adding ly. Nice becomes nicely. But the complication here is that some adjectives end in ly anyway, such as friendly. They are a friendly group of students. And when you have an adjective ending ly, this doesn't work. Don't add another ly to make the adverb. You can't say he acted friendlily. You have to use a different option here instead of adding ly. And some adverbs and adjectives have completely the same form. Here is a limited list of them, some of the most common ones. There are more than these. It was a fast race, adjective noun. They finished fast, adverb because it's describing finished, the verb. It is a slow animal. They played slow. Now, often we'll say they played slowly, but sometimes we can just say slow as the adverb too. I am an early riser. I woke up early. Early riser, adjective noun. Woke up early. Early is an adverb here because it describes how I woke up, which is the verb. They are late to the party. They arrived late. I like exams with a low pass mark. The pass mark has been set low. There is a very high mountain in this country. The plane is flying high. There's a situation where we can use adjectives after imperatives, particularly if you're using the verb to be. Look at the following. Here's what a sentence might normally look like. I want you to be nice to the others. Turn it into an imperative and you can simply say, be nice. Here, nice is the behaviour that is expected. So if we're using an imperative to describe expected behaviour, we can use the adjective after be or some other verbs. There are a few rules to be aware of when using adjectives with copular verbs. The normal form of a sentence looks like this. The brown shed is in the field. Here we have the adjective before the noun, brown followed by shed. With copular verbs, the adjective can come after. The shed is brown. So here brown still describes the shed, but because it's a copular verb, it's come after the shed at the end of the sentence. But there are a few more things we can do still. These adjectives can be followed by a preposition phrase, or sometimes called a prepositional phrase. The shed is black at the top. So here we're adding extra information about the shed, but we need to make it clear we don't mean the whole shed. The shed is black, but where? Only at the top. So we use a preposition phrase afterwards to make it clear what we mean by the black. It kind of describes the adjective. Now, if something needs explaining, we could use a to clause. This information is important to here. So here we're explaining the important word. Important is the adjective. Why is it important, or in which way? To here. It's important through this activity. Or you can use a that clause sometimes. This information is important that you know about. So that you know about is describing important. And perhaps one of the most complicated things to learn is when an adjective changes meaning when it changes position. Look at the two uses of certain here. A certain woman walked into the room. That means a specific woman. And the woman was certain. That means that the woman had no doubts. Now, why did the meaning change? It's because it changed from being an adjective describing the noun straight away, a certain woman going together. And in the second one, certain goes at the end of the sentence. Certain still describes the woman, but now it's after the copular verb. It's a compliment, and the meaning has changed here.